The fluorescent lights of Miller's grocery buzzed with an otherworldly persistence, casting pallid shadows across the nearly empty aisles at this ungodly hour. Marcus wandered between shelves of canned goods and boxed cereals, his shopping basket dangling forgotten from limp fingers as his gaze locked with hers, the woman standing by the produce, midnight tresses cascading down her shoulders like spilled ink on alabaster parchment. Her eyes, how could eyes be that shade of crimson, like wine held to candlelight, regarded him with ancient curiosity that belied her youthful appearance. When she smiled at him from across the tomato display, time seemed to fracture and reassemble itself around her presence, and Marcus found himself moving toward her as if pulled by invisible threads that had somehow always been attached to his soul. "The Roma tomatoes are particularly good tonight," she said, her voice like velvet draped over stone, each syllable perfectly formed as though English were both her first language and something she had mastered only after learning 100 others before it. "I prefer things that are ripe and full of life, don't you?" The parking lot formed a sea of black asphalt beneath the silver coin of moon hanging overhead, their conversation having spiraled from produce to philosophy with bewildering ease as if they had known each other for centuries rather than minutes. Marcus watched his own hand reach out to touch her sleeve as she turned to leave, the gesture both foreign and inevitable to him, like a memory of something he hadn't yet done. "I'm Lilith," she offered, the name falling from her lips like a spell, ancient and powerful despite its simplicity. "I live just beyond the town limits, the old Hargrove place. Perhaps you'd like to continue our conversation there sometime." But sometime became now as Marcus found himself trailing her car with his own, headlights illuminating the winding road leading away from the safety of street lamps and civilization, toward the skeletal silhouette of a house that seemed to emerge from the landscape like a memory refusing to fade. Something in him recognized it, as if he had been traveling toward this destination his entire life. The house stood solitary against the night sky, its weathered clapboards and sagging porch telling stories of decades of neglect, yet somehow retaining a strange dignity that newer homes lacked. Lilith's car was parked in the gravel drive, but she was nowhere to be seen, having seemingly vanished between her vehicle and the front door that stood slightly ajar, creaking gently in the midnight breeze. Marcus approached with caution wrapped in exhilaration, each step across the porch boards eliciting groans that sounded almost like warnings, yet he could no more have turned back than the moth can resist the flame that will consume it. The door yielded to his touch with suspicious ease, swinging inward to reveal a darkness so complete it seemed to breathe. "Hello," he called into the void, his voice sounding small and insignificant against the weight of the silence that responded. "Lilith." "You came," breathed a voice directly behind him, sending electric currents of terror racing along his spine as he whirled to find her standing impossibly close, having made no sound in her approach. The moonlight streaming through the open door illuminated half her face while leaving the other in shadow, creating the disquieting impression that she existed simultaneously in two realms. When she smiled, oh, that terrible, beautiful smile, the gleam of elongated canines caught the pale light, and understanding crashed upon Marcus with the force of inevitability rather than surprise. He stammered, backing toward the door as ancient instincts for self-preservation finally overcame the intoxication of her presence. "You're not human." Her hand shot out with blinding speed, closing the distance between them before he could blink, her grip on his wrist both gentle and immovable as iron. "I am many things, dear Marcus, but I promise you this. I have no intention of harming someone who looks at produce with such charming intensity. Would you really leave now, when we've only just begun to know each other? Besides," she added, her crimson eyes softening with something almost wistful, "I've just taken cinnamon rolls from the oven, and it's been decades since I've had someone to share them with." The kitchen existed in startling contrast to the decaying exterior, warm light spilling from antique fixtures onto modern appliances, the air heavy with the comforting aroma of cinnamon and sugar that seemed impossibly mundane given the circumstances. Marcus sat rigidly in a chair that might have been crafted when the nation was young, watching with fascination as Lilith moved about the space with practiced efficiency, setting delicate china plates before them as if hosting tea rather than whatever strange encounter this had become. 3 centuries gives one time to perfect recipes, she remarked casually, noting his expression as he bit into the most exquisite cinnamon roll he had ever tasted, the perfect balance of spice and sweetness spreading across his tongue like a revelation. Though I must admit, taste is mostly memory for me now, a ghost of sensation rather than the thing itself. They talked until dawn threatened the eastern horizon. Lilith's tales of revolutions witnessed and continents traversed unspooling between him like a tapestry of experiences so vast that Marcus felt his own life shrink to insignificance beside it. And yet, the way she leaned forward to catch his words suggested that his 28 years fascinated her as much as her centuries did him. The digital clock on the nightstand showed 4:37 a.m. when Marcus slipped into the bedroom he shared with Emma, his wife of 3 years, who lay curled on her side of the bed, her honey blonde hair spread across the pillow in the familiar way that had once made his heart swell with tenderness but now seemed merely ordinary after the extraordinary night he had experienced. When she stirred at his presence, blinking sleepily up at him with concern in her entirely normal blue eyes, he found himself saying the words that would fracture their life together beyond repair. "I can't do this anymore. I've met someone else." The fight that erupted was both terrible and banal, her shock transforming rapidly to rage, then to pleading, then back to fury as she hurled accusations that struck with painful accuracy. "One night. You're throwing away 3 years for someone you've known for one night." Yet how could he explain that in those few hours with Lilith he had glimpsed eternity, had felt the boundaries of his existence expand beyond the comfortable limitations of the life he and Emma had constructed? Their voices rose and fell like opposing tides until the coming dawn painted their familiar bedroom in alien light, revealing the ruins of what they had built together. The following sunset found Marcus on Lilith's doorstep with 2 suitcases containing what he had deemed essential from his former life, everything else abandoned as easily as shedding an outgrown skin. Lilith welcomed him without surprise, as if his return had been a certainty written in some cosmic ledger long before either of them had recognized it. "Time moves differently for me," she explained as she helped him arrange his meager belongings among her centuries of collected treasures. "What might seem impulsive to others is merely the recognition of inevitability to me. I knew from the moment I saw you beneath those ghastly fluorescent lights that you belonged in my story, as I belong in yours." The transition from mortal life to living with an immortal proved both simpler and more complex than he had imagined, simple in the day-to-day rhythms they established together, complex in the philosophical implications that revealed themselves in quiet moments when he contemplated the vastly different arcs of their existence. Seasons changed around their small house at the edge of town, years blending into one another like watercolors while Marcus's hair began to silver at the temples and fine lines appeared at the corners of his eyes, changes that Lilith observed with fascination rather than dismay. "Each mark is a story," she would say, tracing the emerging roadmap of his mortality with reverent fingertips. "Your body chronicles time in ways mine has forgotten how to do." They never spoke of the inevitable divergence of their paths, his march toward death, her endless procession through centuries, choosing instead to exist in a perpetual present where love transcended the conventional boundaries of human experience. Sometimes, on particularly clear nights, they would sit on their porch watching distant car headlights trace paths along the highway, and Marcus would feel a moment of vertigo at the thought of all the ordinary lives continuing without him. Emma perhaps remarried, friends moved on, the grocery store still buzzing under fluorescent lights, while he orbited in the gravity of an immortal being who found in his temporary existence something precious precisely because it would not last forever.